Area 51, An Uncensored History of America's Top Secret Military Base. By Annie Jacobsen. During the first week of July 1947, U.S. Signal Corps engineers began tracking two objects with remarkable flying capabilities moving across the southwestern United States. What made the aircraft extraordinary was that, although they flew in a traditional, forward-moving motion, the craft, whatever they were, began to hover sporadically before continuing to fly on. This kind of technology was beyond any aerodynamic capabilities the U.S. Air Force had in development in the summer of 1947. When multiple sources began reporting the same data, it became clear that the radar wasn't showing phantom returns, or electronic ghosts, but something real. Kirtland Army Air Force Base, just north of the White Sands Proving Ground, tracked the flying craft into its near vicinity. The commanding officer there ordered a decorated World War II pilot named Kenny Chandler into a fighter jet to locate and chase the unidentified flying craft. This fact has never before been disclosed. Chandler never visually spotted what he'd been sent to look for. But within hours of Chandler's sweep of the skies, one of the flying objects crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. Immediately, the Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or JCS, took command and control and recovered the airframe and some propulsion equipment, including the crashed craft's power plant, or energy source. The recovered craft looked nothing like a conventional aircraft. The vehicle had no tail and it had no wings. The fuselage was round, and there was a dome mounted on the top. In secret Army intelligence memos declassified in 1994, it would be referred to as a flying disc. Most alarming was a fact kept secret until now. Inside the disc, there was a very earthly hallmark, Russian writing. Block letters from the Cyrillic alphabet had been stamped, or embossed, in a ring running around the inside of the craft. In a critical moment, the American military had its worst fears realized. The Russian army must have gotten its hands on German aerospace engineers more capable than Ernst Steinhoff and Wernher von Braun, engineers who must have developed this flying craft years before for the German Air Force, or Luftwaffe. The Russians simply could not have developed this kind of advanced technology on their own. Russia's stockpile of weapons and its body of scientists had been decimated during the war. The nation had lost more than 20 million people. Most Russian scientists still alive had spent the war in the Gulag. But the Russians, like the Americans, the British, and the French, had pillaged Hitler's best and brightest scientists as war booty, each country taking advantage of them to move forward in the New World. And now, in July of 1947, shockingly, the Soviet Supreme Leader had somehow managed not only to penetrate U.S. airspace near the Alaskan border, but to fly over several of the most sensitive military installations in the western United States. Stalin had done this with foreign technology that the U.S. Army Air Forces knew nothing about. It was an incursion so brazen, so antithetical to the perception of America's strong national security, which included the military's ability to defend itself against air attack, that upper echelon Army intelligence officers swept in and took control of the entire situation. The first thing they did was initiate the withdrawal of the original Roswell Army Airfield press release, the one that stated that a flying disc landed on a ranch near Roswell, and then they replaced it with the second press release, the one that said that a weather balloon had crashed, nothing more. The weather balloon story has remained the official cover story ever since. The fears were legitimate, fears that the Russians had hover and fly technology, that their flying craft could outfox U.S. radar, and that it could deliver to America a devastating blow. The single most worrisome question facing the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time was, what if atomic energy propelled the Russian craft? Or worse, what if it dispersed radioactive particles, like a modern-day dirty bomb? In 1947, the United States believed it still had a monopoly on the atomic bomb as a deliverable weapon. But as early as June 1942, Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, had been overseeing the Third Reich's Research Council on Nuclear Physics as a weapon in its development of an airplane called the America Bomber, designed to drop a dirty bomb on New York City. Any number of those scientists could be working for the Russians. The Central Intelligence Group, the CIA's institutional predecessor, did not yet know that a spy at Los Alamos National Laboratory, a man named Klaus Fuchs, had stolen bomb blueprints and given them to Stalin. Or that Russia was 2 years away from testing its own atomic bomb. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, all the Joint Chiefs of Staff had to go on from the Central Intelligence Group was speculation about what atomic technology Russia might have. For the military, the very fact that New Mexico's airspace had been violated was shocking. This region of the country was the single most sensitive weapons-related domain in all of America. The White Sands Missile Range was home to the nation's classified weapons delivery systems. The nuclear laboratory up the road, the Los Alamos Laboratory, was where scientists had developed the atomic bomb and where they were now working on nuclear packages with 1,000 times the yield. Outside Albuquerque, at a production facility called Sandia Base, assembly line workers were forging Los Alamos nuclear packages into smaller and smaller bombs. 45 miles to the southwest, at the Roswell Army Airfield, the 509th Bomb Wing was the only wing of long-range bombers equipped to carry and drop nuclear bombs. Things went from complicated to critical at the revelation that there was a second crash site. Paperclip scientists Wernher von Braun and Ernst Steinhoff, still under review over the Juarez rocket crash, were called on for their expertise. Several other paperclip scientists specializing in aviation medicine were brought in. The evidence of whatever had crashed at and around Roswell, New Mexico, in the first week of July in 1947 was gathered together by a Joint Chiefs of Staff Technical Services unit and secreted away in a manner so clandestine, it followed security protocols established for transporting uranium in the early days of the Manhattan Project. The first order of business was to determine where the technology had come from. The Joint Chiefs of Staff tasked an elite group working under the direct orders of G2 Army Intelligence to initiate a top-secret project called Operation 𝗲𝗱𝗄𝗃. Based on the testimony of America's paperclip scientists, Army intelligence officers believed that the flying disc was the brainchild of two former Third Reich airplane engineers, named Walter and Reimar Horten, now working for the Russian military. Orders were drawn up. The manhunt was on. Walter and Reimar Horten were two aerospace engineers whose importance in seminal aircraft projects had somehow been overlooked when America and the Soviet Union were fighting over scientists at the end of the war. The brothers were the inventors of several of Hitler's flying wing aircraft, including one called the Horten 229 or Horten 9, a wing-shaped, tailless airplane that had been developed at a secret facility in Baden-Baden during the war. From the paperclip scientists at Wright Field, the Army intelligence investigators learned that Hitler was rumored to have been developing a faster flying aircraft that had been designed by the brothers and was shaped like a saucer. Maybe, the paperclips said, there had been a later model Horten in the works before Germany surrendered, meaning that even if Stalin didn't have the Horten brothers themselves, he could very likely have gotten control of their blueprints and plans. The flying disc that crashed at Roswell had technology more advanced than anything the U.S. Army Air Forces had ever seen. Its propulsion techniques were particularly confounding. What made the craft go so fast? How was it so stealthy, and how did it trick radar? The disc had appeared on Army radar screens briefly and then suddenly disappeared. The incident at Roswell happened just weeks before the National Security Act, which meant there was no true central intelligence agency to handle the investigation. Instead, hundreds of counterintelligence corps, CIC, officers from the U.S. Army's European Command were dispatched across Germany in search of anyone who knew anything about Walter and Reimar Horten. Officers tracked down and interviewed the brothers' relatives, colleagues, professors, and acquaintances with an urgency not seen since Operation Alsos, in which Allied forces sought information about Hitler's atomic scientists and nuclear programs during the war. A records group of more than 300 pages of Army intelligence documents reveals many of the details of Operation 𝗲𝗱𝗄𝗃. They were declassified in 1994, after a researcher named Timothy Cooper filed a request for documents under the Freedom of Information Act. One memo, called Air Intelligence Guide for Alleged Flying Saucer-Type Aircraft, detailed for CIC officers the parameters of the flying saucer technology the military was looking for, features which were evidenced in the craft that crashed at Roswell. Extreme maneuverability and apparent ability to almost hover, a planform approximating that of an oval or disc with dome shape on the surface, the ability to quickly disappear by high speed or by complete disintegration, the ability to group together very quickly in a tight formation when more than one aircraft are together, evasive motion ability indicating possibility of being manually operated, or possibly, by electronic or remote control. The counter, Intelligence Corps' official 1947-1948 manhunt for the Horten brothers reads at times like a spy novel and at times like a wild goose chase. The first real lead in the hunt came from Dr. Adolf Smeckel of Frankfurt, who provided CIC with a list of possible informants' names. Agents were told a dizzying array of alleged facts. Reimar was living in secret in East Prussia. Reimar was living in Göttingen, in what had been the British zone. Reimar had been kidnapped presumably by the Russians in the latter part of 1946. If you want to know where Reimar is, one informant said, you must first locate Hannah Reich, the famous aviatrix who was living in Bad Hogheim. As for Walter, he was working as a consultant for the French. He was last seen in Frankfurt trying to find work with a university there. He was in Dessau. Actually, he was in Russia. He was in Luxembourg, or maybe it was France. One German scientist turned informant chided CIC agents. If they really wanted to know where the Horten brothers were, he said, and what they were capable of, then go ask the American paperclip scientists living at Wright Field. Neatly typed and intricately detailed summaries of hundreds of interviews with the Horten brothers' colleagues and relatives flooded the CIC. Army intelligence officers spent months chasing leads, but most information led them back to square one. In the fall of 1947, prospects of locating the brothers seemed grim until November, when CIC agents caught a break. A former Messerschmitt test pilot named Fritz Wendel offered up some first-hand testimony that seemed real. The Horten brothers had indeed been working on a flying saucer-like craft in 𝗖𝘆𝗰𝗶𝗶𝗃, East Prussia, right after the war, Wendel said. The airplane was 10 meters long and shaped like a half-moon. It had no tail. The prototype was designed to be flown by one man lying down flat on his stomach. It reached a ceiling of 12,000 feet. Wendel drew diagrams of this saucer-like aircraft, as did a second German informant named Professor George, who described a later model Horten as being very much like a round cake with a large sector cut out and that had been developed to carry more than one crew member. The later model Horten could travel higher and faster, up to 1,200 miles per hour, because it was propelled by rockets rather than jet engines. Its cabin was allegedly pressurized for high-altitude flights. The Americans pressed Fritz Wendel for more. Could it hover? Not that Wendel knew. Did he know if groups could fly tightly together? Wendel said he had no idea. Were high-speed escapement methods designed into the craft? Wendel wasn't sure. Could the flying disc be remotely controlled? Yes, Wendel said he knew of radio control experiments being conducted by Siemens and Halske at their electrical factory in Berlin. Army officers asked Wendel if he had heard of any hovering or near-hovering technologies. No. Did Wendel have any idea about the tactical purposes for such an aircraft? Wendel said he had no idea. The next batch of solid information came from a rocket engineer named Walter Ziegler. During the war, Ziegler had worked at the car manufacturer 𝗖𝘆𝗰𝗶𝗃𝗃, or BMW, which served as a front for advanced rocket science research. There, Ziegler had been on a team tasked with developing advanced fighter jets powered by rockets. Ziegler relayed a chilling tale that gave investigators an important clue. One night, about a year after the war, in September of 1946, 400 men from his former rocket group at BMW had been invited by Russian military officers to a fancy dinner. The rocket scientists were wined and dined and, after a few hours, taken home. Most were drunk. Several hours later, all 400 of the men were woken up in the middle of the night by their Russian hosts and told they were going to be taking a trip. Why Ziegler wasn't among them was not made clear. The Germans were told to bring their wives, their children, and whatever else they needed for a long trip. Mistresses and livestock were also fine. This was not a situation to which you could say no, Ziegler explained. The scientists and their families were transported by rail to a small town outside Moscow where they had remained ever since, forced to work on secret military projects in terrible conditions. According to Ziegler, it was at this top-secret Russian facility, exact whereabouts unknown, that the German scientists were developing rockets and other advanced technologies under Russian supervision. These were Russia's version of the American paperclip scientists. It was very possible, Ziegler said, that the Horten brothers had been working for the Russians at the secret facility there. For 9 long months, CIC agents typed up memo after memo relating various theories about where the Horten brothers were, what their flying saucers might have been designed for, and what leads should or should not be pursued. And then, 6 months into the investigation, on March 12, 1948, along came abrupt news. The Horten brothers had been found. In a memo to the European Command of the 970th CIC, Major Earl S. Browning Jr. explained. The Horten brothers have been located and interrogated by American agencies, Browning said. The Russians had likely found the blueprints of the flying wing after all. It is Walter Horten's opinion that the blueprints of the Horten 9 may have been found by Russian troops at the Gotha Railroad car factory, the memo read. But a second memo, entitled Extracts on Horten, Walter, explained a little more. Former Messerschmitt test pilot Fritz Wendel's information about the Horten brothers' wingless, tailless, saucer-like craft that had room for more than one crew member was confirmed. Walter Horten's opinion is that sufficient German types of flying wings existed in the developing or designing stages when the Russians occupied Germany, and these types may have enabled the Russians to produce the flying saucer. There is no mention of Reimar Horten, the second brother, in any of the hundreds of pages of documents released to Timothy Cooper as part of his Freedom of Information Act request, despite the fact that both brothers had been confirmed as located and interrogated. Nor is there any mention of what Reimar Horten did or did not say about the later model Horten flying discs. But one memo mentioned the Horten X and another referred to the Horten 13. No further details have been provided, and a 2011 Freedom of Information Act request by the author met a dead end. On May 12, 1948, the headquarters of European Command sent the Director of Intelligence at the United States Forces in Austria a puzzling memo. Walter Horten has admitted his contacts with the Russians, it said. That was the last mention of the Horten brothers in the Army Intelligence's declassified record for Operation Harris. Whatever else officially exists on the Horten brothers and their advanced flying saucer continues to be classified as of 2011, and the crash remains from Roswell quickly fell into the blackest regions of government. They would stay at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for approximately 4 years. From there, they would quietly be shipped out west to become intertwined with a secret facility out in the middle of the Nevada desert. No one but a handful of people would have any idea they were there.